Uh, I believe you've indicated that Imago has received um, some additional funds that can be allocated to serving those most vulnerable in the community at large. I think I'm correct that you had shared that with me. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We received from one of our congregants an anonymous, donation of about $50,000 to ask for that to be met, and our people showed up in a huge way.
Hmm.
And so far, we've rallied about $130,000 to go
That's
towards
wonderful.
supporting our
Hmm.
city and our people affected by COVID-19.
So, and how are you able to put those funds to use along with other resources? I know it's relational at the end of the day, and it's not simply monetary, but
Right.
money sure helps, doesn't it? So,
It does.
could you just share a little bit about how those resources are being put to use in our community?
Sure thing. Yeah, it feels really strange for me and I think a lot of our community because we often say at Imago, like one of the best things we have to give to our city is our people, is service and relationship. And um, to kind of pivot so hard to be that the one thing we actually have to give in this season is money, because our people are facing crisis as well, and aren't as available, or you can't go and serve in certain places with shutdowns. So that's been a shift, to realize that that's what we have in this moment to give. But like you said, it sure helps. And in this season, when finances is one of the greatest needs that a lot of people are facing due to job loss, due to, all kinds of reasons affected by COVID-19, it's been huge. Amago's been our staff has been part of a lot of conversations over the last 7 to 10 years, around diversity, around racial injustice. One of the things that came up as we responded to other crises in the past was that relief funds don't always get dispersed equitably, and especially private relief funds tend to come from those who have resource and go out to those that they have a relationship with. And often that looks like goes out to people who look exactly like them, and who live in similar places. And so one of the things we wanted to keep on our radar was how can we equitably make sure that this money is going out to communities that have less access to other relief funds. um, and then the other things we've learned along the way have been that a population's most vulnerable people become even more vulnerable during crisis.
Mm.
And it would be really hard for some of the stories we're hearing to separate out if the need started before COVID-19 or after COVID-19, because vulnerable communities just get more vulnerable during crisis. And to just say we're not going to try to hold too big of a line on that, right? We just want to be here for our city's most vulnerable, and we want to do it equitably. And so we've reached out to started early on, just reaching out, offering prayer and encouragement and togetherness to existing partners as well as new partners. And so what we found in that process early on was that there was a couple of groups that had largely been um, unseen in our city, and by our city's churches. And so one of those groups was girls in the sex industry or who had left the sex industry. Um, Single moms who were looking at, because of loss of legit jobs, having to consider, and some going back to street-based sex work in order to provide for their families. And some of those, just really horrific stories of pimps dropping girls off on streets saying you can't do your work anymore. You can't provide for me. Then you've got to figure out on your own. And to hear of girls for the first time being homeless in their life, and the fear, you know, as different organizations that I talked to saying that their workload in that arena was increasing 300%, that they were having, just dozens more girls reaching out to them every day, with food insecurity and just bodily safety insecurity. Where are we going to live? Just so many of those things that we realized we needed to step in to help some of those organizations who were doing that work. And to hear from those leaders at those organizations who you know were responding with things like I was one of them at Cupcake Girls. This woman, the director there, she said, I'm a believer, and I had sent out all of these emails to all these churches at random, asking anyone to help, and nobody had responded. And I'm sure churches are getting just a ton of emails right now. She goes, but I was sitting here saying, God, where's your church? I was sitting here crying, going like, God, where is your church? How do they not see this? These people who need you and need your people. And then she goes, and then you called, and it was like instantly I felt hope. Instantly I felt like, okay, there's somebody that sees, God speaking, and we're gonna be okay. I think our people are gonna be okay. I think we're gonna be okay. One
Mm.
of the other groups that we found recently, early on in the process, was extremely vulnerable. Were immigrants in our city, people who were undocumented, asylum seekers, DACA recipients, day laborers, people, even those immigrants who are, have documentation but might have job loss, and to say that many of them had less resource to even the governmental relief funds that were coming forward, and weren't going to receive those. So as children had to start learning at home, and parents lost work, it became really difficult for a lot of families in our city. Um, and many of them were fearful to go to government locations or to regular services, for fear of repercussions. And so, as we heard those stories, we started reaching out to organizations. And so, some of the great things that we've been able to do there and witness were, we reached out to SOAR Immigration Legal Services. One of our community members is a lawyer there, and so she was asking us to pray for some individuals who were facing deportation in the midst of all of this. And I talked to their director, and they had so much need. It was like, we can't meet our people, so we have to do it digitally, and they don't have devices and might not be tech literate, and we have to mail everything into the courts, and so the immigration system is still operating, and it's on the same time frame. So we now have to, within our normal 30-day process, to get everything submitted for asylum seekers. We now have to account for a 5-day process to mail and a 5-day on this end. It just all got shorter. But the thing that kept her up at night was her DACA recipients, who, a handful of these young people who were set to pay their fees, so they could continue to stay here and educate and work and support their families, and be part of their family here, due to job loss, weren't able to pay those fees. And we're looking at the fact that just a lot of fear and worry. And so we were able to help pay for at least 6 students, or 6 young people who were DACA recipients, to pay their fees. And she told me, when I was able to respond back to that, she said, I just had a meeting with our staff, and every one of them is so done and tired, and it feels like nobody sees us. She goes, and I get to go back and tell them that this world is still full of people who see. This world is still full of people who care, and this world is still full of people who see what you're doing and think it matters. She goes, I can't wait to go back and tell them that. And from what I understand, this person is not a believer, but we've been able to converse and have conversations and pray together. And that's been the case all throughout this time, is hearing really incredibly difficult things, trying to throw a little bit of funds to help out a little bit, and yet in that space, God has been faithful to just open the door to have conversation about why we're in this, why we're here, why we love all of our neighbors. That's been really cool.
And that point of connection, the sense of hope that people are not alone. I hear all